And happy in between Christmas and New Year's week, sports fan. This is your TrogCast, two really old guys talking sports. We'll be getting you caught up on the NCAA men's basketball landscape. Hope that you're not too overloaded from Christmas turkey and that Santa was good to you. Was Santa good to you, Jim Reaker?
He is good to me. My gift will start tomorrow as I take a trip south for a little while. So it's a gift that I haven't experienced yet, but I do appreciate a big one. Spend some time with my children. Great time of year, holidays to do that. So I saw you had a little get-together with your siblings last night. I hope you enjoyed that.
We did. Four of us were here in town, got together, and tried to get the other two on the phone. Didn't quite make that happen. Ran into somebody down there. It was kind of nice. Got to see your son, Austin, for a couple of minutes. That's always
well, I saw you went there, but he didn't mention anything about it, so I didn't even ask him if he saw you. I thought maybe you guys had missed each other there, but obviously not.
Shows how much I fall on his schedule there. He's a busy man. Got better things to do. Well, let's jump right in. I mean, we said last week there wouldn't be much going on with the holidays and everything, and there wasn't much. The one game we kind of previewed, Louisville and Kentucky, was quite a good game, and other than that, there wasn't a lot going on, and there wasn't much of a change in the top 25. Louisville moved up 4 spots with that win over UK, and UK dropped a couple, and South Carolina, with a couple of ugly losses, has dropped out, so Florida's back in at the number 25. But that was, again, as you would expect from Pitino and Cal, quite a battle there in Louisville, and the Cardinals came out on top.
Yeah, and kind of, if you recall, last time we talked about it, I think it was the day before that game or maybe the day of that game, and I said I thought this was going to be a challenge for the UK Wildcats. It was really their first true road game in a hostile environment, and I believed that Rick Pitino, who is a master of defenses, was going to throw some things at them, and I don't think the Wildcats reacted all that well to it, but I think this is going to be the story of their season. Again, you have the SEC as one of yours, and you've said UK is going to win it, and I hardly disagree. But I think they're going to suffer some losses along the line. Again, with those young players, those one and dones come growing pains.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, they're still going to be there in the end, and we know that. It's when those two teams get together, it's like we talked about before. They're crossroads shootouts with the teams in Indiana. It's not like Louisville's going to have an easy road of it, as we'll talk about here in a little bit. But they're both going to be there. It was a good win for Coach Pitino. I think they were only like 8-1 since Coach Cal has been there in that sort of turnout. So it's good. Of course, this week we start conference play, and when you look at it, there's lots of nice matchups between the top 25 teams within conference. It's going to be a big week for 4 of them. Louisville, Virginia, Indiana, and Oregon are all going to face 2 top 25 opponents this week. So we're going to find out a little bit more about them as we go along. And it's all going to start off tomorrow night. And number 12, Virginia, is going to travel to Louisville, and they're going to have their second test. And then, of course, a little later on New Year's Eve, Louisville's got to go to Indianapolis to play the Indiana Hoosiers. So now that they've bounced off against UK, what do you expect to continue for the Cardinals?
Well, I first have to give props to Rick Pitino for throwing that IU game there in the middle of the start of the ACC season. But I think that's what you got to do this day and age. You got to play quality teams to try to put quality wins on your resume. Again, going back to UK, I think the only quality team they have left is that mid-January game against Kansas. I think that's at Rupp Arena. And I think that might hurt the Wildcats when it comes to seeding, because they've had some big games that they really haven't, they've faltered in a few of those. And, again, not having that many left in this season, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. But, I give Rick Pitino props for going to Indianapolis. I'm sure that place will be rocking. That's a short trip for the Louisville fans, and they travel well. So it'll be a good game between the Hoosiers and the Cardinals.
And it will. Taking on Kentucky and then have to do a conference game against a tough Virginia squad and then go right into Indiana isn't doing you any blessings, but it'll be a great way to start 2017 and head toward the tournament. The Pac-10 is going to be hopping too. You got Oregon, who has to host. At least they're going to be at home for both these games. Their first two games are against number 2 UCLA, which we've talked about several times, and how they're growing with T.J. Leaf and Lonzo Ball. And then they got to turn right around on Friday. That game's tomorrow night as well. But the Friday game, then they have to take on USC, which has been one of the surprises of the year. And I think we're going to find out there, as we talked about in our conference preview, whether Oregon and USC are going to be contenders or pretenders as we start a tough Pac-12 season.
Yeah, that Oregon USC team might really – I think it's going to be a big game to show who really maybe is going to compete in the Pac-10. Just reading a little bit about USC this morning, I didn't realize that Andy Enfield, who was with Florida Gulf Coast a few years ago, took them to the Final Four. He's out there now, and I was reading a little bit about his rise to major college basketball coaching, kind of a interesting read that he was the shot doctor who started out making videotapes how to shoot and started peddling those, which led to a little bit of a stint in the NBA as an assistant, which led to an assistant coaching at Florida under Billy Donovan, which got him down to the Florida Gulf Coast, where he made the most of an opportunity, took him to the Final Four, which led to this game out at USC. So that was I didn't know all that about him. That was an interesting little read I had this morning. But, yeah, I think either Oregon or USC is going to come out as a real contender after this weekend.
Yeah, we'll see. With both of them, and Oregon, if they can't take at least one of those at home, it could be a long season for them. Of course, also at USC, they announced this week that Charles O'Banion Jr., who's the nephew of Ed O'Banion, which most people wouldn't remember from the UCLA run in the 90s, probably know him more for the suit against the NCAA for the use of his image, trying to get paid for that. But in a little slap to his uncle's face, Charles signed with USC this week, and that'll be another big recruit to coach out there. So good.
Yeah, not a big matchup in as far as ranked teams, but the Big Ten actually has a couple interesting games tonight that I'll kind of be watching. Minnesota, which we talked about last week, off to a really good start, 12-1 with Rick Pitino Jr., actually visits Michigan State tonight. And again, we've talked about Michigan State a lot with Izzo and his tough scheduling. They're standing at 8-5, so that'll be an interesting game. Is Minnesota a real contender that might have something to say in the Big Ten? And now that Michigan State has gone through that tough pre-conference schedule, will it pay off as they start to play Big Ten teams day in and day out? So that'll be interesting. Another interesting game that'll take place is Northwestern at Penn State. Penn State is not that good, but Northwestern's had a really good start there. I believe 10-2, 11-2, and their losses have been to ranked teams. Can they win at Penn State? And then they turn around, this is interesting, on Friday, and they go to Michigan State. So I think we're going to see, we've talked about the pretenders and the contenders and a lot of these teams. After this first week of conference play, some things are going to shake out in some of these major conferences, and we'll have a better idea of what's going to go on.
Yeah. Well, it always got that. And, of course, there's a long time between now and the end of February, beginning of March, when they'll run through their conference schedule and get set for their conference tournaments. But these early games will tell you a little bit, but it'll be the conferences we're talking about. They just beat up on each other, and you just never know what's going to happen come tournament time. Another big game comes up on two big games on Saturday. First, we'll talk about the lesser game. Virginia, of course, who has to go to Louisville tomorrow night, has to turn around and have a conference game against Florida State, which has been a surprise. They're at number 20, and Virginia's, Tony Bennett's had a great squad there, and they go on defense, and Florida State's a little high flying. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that one. Of course, it's in Charlottesville, so I'd have to give the nod to Virginia on that one. But then the big one on Saturday, which I'm sure you're going to be eagerly awaiting, is the match of the undefeateds in Omaha when number 1 Villanova goes to play number 10 Creighton in let's say the battles of the unbeatens. One of the 6 that are still left will fall on Saturday for sure.
Yeah, that'll be a big game out there, and that actually follows the Xavier game. Xavier at Georgetown at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and then that follows right after at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday. We'll be watching that. But back to the ACC, you mentioned a few of those games, and I think we've talked about already that the ACC is definitely the deepest league thus far in the 16-17 season, and they could go, we talked about maybe double digits deep in bids to the NCAA. I want to bring up the Grayson Allen situation. Happened the same night as the UK-Kentucky game. Could that cause some conflict, some controversy that might affect the Duke Blue Devils? I know you picked them and UNC to fight out for the ACC. What's your take on that whole situation?
Well, it's getting into one of the topics we're talking about, just manners in sports. It's a tough one. You got to also remember that Allen sat 3 or 4 games earlier in the year, hurt, and it allowed for Coach K to play some of the guys off his bench. And one person who's emerged as a star, which they think can fill that void, is from up here north of us in Franklin, Ohio, Luke Kennard, who went down there. But the thing that's going to be difficult, as you talk about so often too, and is very crucial, will be how the team decides to deal with Grayson moving forward. I was happy to hear that Coach K decided to take some action. I think it needed to be done with a repeat. He had his 2 incidences last February and promised he was a new man, and it was an obvious trip, and then his antics on the sideline that obviously had to be dealt with. And how long? Right now he's suspended indefinitely. But as you know, it'll be what happens when he returns to the team. Is he going to be walking on eggshells, knowing he's a bit targeted now? And, of course, it'll take a long time for him to live that down. Christian Leitner, another Dookie, is probably almost known as much for stomping on an opponent as hitting a last-second shot against Kentucky. But Grayson Allen right now needs to take care of Grayson Allen, and I think Coach K's got to think of that as he goes through. If he comes back and he helps the team, that's great. But right now, I think he almost needs to look at how he's going to last the season without a Grayson Allen.
Yeah, I think the whole situation, and we've seen a few situations recently of things going on. I think a lot of it just comes from the frustration that these young men are put under, and even the coaches. I was surprised the initial reaction from Coach K, and obviously it changed very, very quickly the next morning when he came out and said that he would be suspended indefinitely. And I was giving Coach K a little bit of slack, thinking when he had that press conference right after it that maybe he hadn't really seen what he had done, because he did hold him out of starting in the second half, but he put him back into the game, which a lot of people were saying that never should have happened. But I'll give Coach K a little bit of slack there. Maybe he didn't know exactly what had happened, because when that play did take place, it was at the opposite end of where the Duke bench would have been during that game. So, and maybe I think Coach K, I think everybody's under a lot of pressure. They're traveling. Again, the players have just been through exams, most of them at most universities, and it's a lot of stress for 18 to 22-year-olds or even 60-some-plus-year-old coaches.
Mm-hmm. That brings us to one of our topics, which is manners in sports. And is this becoming more of an issue, or is it just an ongoing thing? Most of them are very dedicated and polite young men and go through everything, but these incidences get exacerbated. But two things that also happened in the past week, came from the coaches. Yeah, there's a lot of pressure, and you got to wonder how you deal with it. You and I have both been in those situations where your emotions get the best of you in the middle of a game, or you're not able to take that step back, or you're having to deal with an athlete. But just last week, the Iowa-North Dakota game, Fran McCaffrey, at the end of the game, pulled his team off and said, no, we're not shaking their hands. And he did apologize later, but his instant response is he was upset with some of the rough play and a play very late in the game where the North Dakota players stole the ball when they were holding it to run out the clock and score. But this is coming from the coach, as well as, also in the past week or so, the Morehead State coach, Sean Woods, is finally he resigned. He was under suspension for reportedly pushing and shoving and even headbutting a player, and he has been charged with misdemeanor battery. So you just got to wonder if this is also what's happening with the adults, if that trickles down into some of the players' anxieties and, like I say, leading to instances like with Grayson Allen and others.
Yeah, well, here's the reality where college basketball is today. The coaches basically are CEOs of multi-million-dollar companies. And if those companies aren't being successful and not accomplishing what they hope to bring recognition and pride to the university, well, we know what the end result is. They don't stay around very long. So that's got to be a lot of pressure on them, even though they are well compensated for what they do and probably could go a couple of years without working if they do lose their job. But I think it's just the whole vision of basketball, college basketball now, that, you know, people look upon this, and fans, you know, they put a lot of pressure on their universities to be successful so they can go out and brag about their universities. So I just think it's a lot of stress, and certain people deal with it well and certain people crack sometimes. But, yeah, it'll be interesting to watch that situation down at Duke. I think you're exactly right. How does he bring that back? In fact, I think Grayson Allen was probably frustrated. He had been injured. You know, he was named as maybe a possible National Player of the Year, but he wasn't playing initially because he was injured. Of course, he has some one-and-doners coming into Duke who some say might be some of the best in the country. And then he has Luke Kennard who, you know, is basically outplaying him and has been probably the most valuable player for Duke so far. So I think a lot of that stress got to him, why he did what he did. Again, there's been all kinds of talk about, you know, does he have a psychological problem? Why does he do this? You know, what's the answer to fixing that? But I think it's just a lot of holiday stress.
Well, it is that, but I think it's also incumbent upon the coaches to make these teachable moments and put teaching at the forefront. I agree with you that they have the pressure of being the hallmarks of the university, and it brings money in and all that, but we are still talking about 18 to 22-year-olds and, you know, student athletes, and, you know, but it even trickles down into the fans. I know I went down with a couple of friends to watch the University of Cincinnati play Marshall the other day, and it was a great game, and it went into overtime, and Cincinnati won on a last-second shot, but the height of it was that a Marshall player, everybody thought had kicked a UC player when he was down. And, you know, when you looked at the video, it was more like he got caught up in the player and he's trying to shake his foot loose so he could get back on the court. And then, you know, after the referees talked about it, the Marshall player went over and apologized and shook the guy's hand and all was good. But every time he touched the ball after that, he got booed. And when he ended up fouling out in overtime, the fans cheered. And it just gets back to, you know, where do you draw the line in that? I know the fans should be able to react and boost on their team, but it's just a difficult line to continue to walk, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, I totally agree. But, you know, as far as college basketball goes, they are getting a lot of attention because of some of these things, you know, and this is the tough time for them when they're competing with, you know, right now the bowl season and coming up the college playoff round or tournament that will go into effect, and then the NFL gets into their playoffs. So, you know, I was listening to a show the other day. Is this good for college basketball? Because it is bringing attention and getting them notoriety on the sports talk shows that we all watch every day.
You know, the question I brought up to you too. The other problem is, you know, who's responsible for that? Should, you know, in the Allen situation, Coach K stepped in, but should it be the coach that you leave that to, or should the university administration step in when there's problems like this on the court and try to deal with it? And, you know, the very famous case of, you know, Bobby Knight at Indiana, where the college president said, you know, this isn't going to go on anymore, and a very famous coach lost his job. Or should there be a stronger role from the league or conference administrations and commissioners to try to police some of this stuff?
Well, in my view, I think if it's a player's actions, it should initially be taken care of by the coach, which we've seen obviously in the Grayson Allen case, and you go to Xavier with the Miles Davis case. But sometimes it's the coach that's the problem. So obviously he's not going to take care of himself, or he hasn't. So at that point, I think the university needs to step in and take action. And, of course, what if it's the university? There's just some recent come out this week that North Carolina's still, their basketball program might be under some scrutiny by the NCAA because of some academic fraud. So the answer to your question, I think, different cases, the answer is different.
And I think that's what leads to some of the big question marks, is these things are sort of handled willy-nilly, and one, it's the coach or whatever. But it's going to go back to the pressure, too. You just brought up something before we went on the air, which adds to it. You mentioned the case of Hamidou Diallo, who's shopping himself around to schools, highly placed recruit who's now hoping that he can come in, for a semester and this sort of adds to the pressure that some people are under, whether it be the kid who wants to keep his spot or the coach is trying to turn the season around. So why don't you enlighten our listeners a little bit about the Hamidou Diallo situation?
Well, I just came across him today in some of my readings, and he's actually he graduated from high school last year. He's from Queens, New York, but he actually, I'm not quite sure how this all came about, but he went to a prep school. But now he's come out and said that he wants to enter a university the second semester, and basically I guess they've looked into it, and the NCAA says there's no reason why he would not be eligible to play, because he is eligible. Having graduated from high school, he would be eligible to start the second semester. And in fact, a lot of people thought he was going to go to UConn, but there has been sightings of him on the UK campus just as recent as yesterday. It seems like Kansas, who just lost a big player, their 7-foot freshman has broken his wrist, and he'll be out for the year, so maybe there. Syracuse, although, Syracuse has kind of faltered what we expected of them so far this year, and then even there's been talk of him going to Indiana. And here's the thing, and maybe this is a discussion we have for another day. Maybe we invite a UK fan on the air one day, because I got to thinking, if you're a UK fan, do you really appreciate these one-and-dones coming in every year? There's no continuity, and are we a great program because we've developed as a great program, or just because we attract these superstars that are only going to be there for 1 year? And how does that affect you as a fan? I'm sure UK fans say, "Oh, hey, it's fine as long as we win a national championship." Although I will argue that it'll be the reason why I don't think they will win a national championship, because I think we're starting to see some of the teams this fall, so far in this year, the ones that have the veterans returning, some 3- and 4-year players, are the ones that have done well this year. Look at Quentin Snyder, who is not a superstar by any means, but most people would argue he probably was the turning point of that Louisville game by scoring 22 points in some of the plays he made against UK.
Yeah, well, we'll add that to the list and maybe try to get a couple people on there, because it is the thing. Even ESPN had an article today about how, looking back at, is it still the year of the freshman? They go, yes, it is, but it also that some of those types of players are also moving to the forefront. And I think you make a key point. Most of the UK fans say if we're winning, that's fine. And who knows what's going to happen this year. But Coach Cal does have one tournament win and a final game going that way. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. But this Diallo situation could be even, more of an issue. Like you said, he's a half and done. Because if he comes in, like Ben Simmons last year, Ben Simmons just basically said he wasn't at school and wasn't going to do it. Now this kid can come in, and he doesn't even have to worry about his first semester GPA to stay eligible. He got that semester, and he can go from there. And it's a difficult precedent. It'd be interesting to see where he lands and how that coach deals with it. If he is going to just be a half done, like you said, I can't see him going to a Connecticut or Syracuse, who are already sort of down, and that sort of leaves Arizona, Indiana, Kansas, and Kentucky, and they're all pretty well stocked. How do you fit him in? But that's the landscape today, which goes to the pressure we're also talking about in this manner in sports, when these kids know that they only have to go 1 year, and they're not really there to go to school. So you can't put that on them. They're there basically as an NBA or some other professional prep program, and that has been established. And unless the NCAA changes that to a 2-year rule or go back to being able to draft kids out of high school, who knows what's going to happen there?
Yeah, just think about that situation. If he enrolls the second semester at a university and he doesn't have to face any eligibility until the end of that first semester, he would basically just have to be enrolled in the proper number of credit hours, but would he even have to ever attend? So he could be just a hired gun brought in to play basketball and never take a class, actually appear for a class, unless the university or the coach would enforce or check his attendance in the classes during that second semester, which would be his first semester. So, yeah, I think, it's the way things are going, and I think the NCAA is going to have to take a look at what's going on, especially if this one plays out the way we see it maybe playing out.
Well, that's an interesting topic, and we said, we keep going back to Ben Simmons, and he withdrew the day after his last game at LSU. He didn't even try to finish this semester, just kind of got ready for the NBA draft. So it could just be, kind of like a Major League Baseball, where you get somebody at the trading deadline for a couple of month run to try to get you through the playoffs, and then they become a free agent. So we'll have that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and we'll try to wrap things up so people can go ahead and get on to their returning gifts and taking advantage of the shopping discounts that are going out there. Before we go, we'd like to wish a couple happy birthdays today. Gonzaga's Mark Few is 63 years old today, and Bill Self also has a birthday out there in Kansas. He turns 54, and on Friday, someone near and dear to your heart, Chris Mack of the Xavier Musketeers, will turn 47. What else you got for me? I'm sure you got something that you're going to try to run past me here.
Well, just a couple things. Something that ran across kind of interesting. We talk about we are in the heart of college basketball country here in southwestern Ohio. Do you realize that right now that 8 of the top 25 teams, not quite a third, but almost a third of all the teams that are ranked are in the state of Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky?
Mm. Well, it's always been powerhouse states, and it's not surprising. A lot of great programs when you've got Louisville, Kentucky already there, Cincinnati, Butler, IU. There's just a whole parcel of them. And then you also got teams like OSU that aren't ranked that have been strong in the past. So it's always a strength here in the center of the country, and we hope that will continue on through the tournament.
Also, you need to have I know you were just waiting for this, your Fort Wayne Mastodons update. They did defeat Detroit this week. They now have a record of 10-3, and their next game, I believe, is December 29th. They will be playing. It's actually their first Summit League game, and that is against the Western Illinois. Do you know that mascot? That's a tough one. That's a unique one.
No, I don't. What are the Western
Illinois Leathernecks?
The Leathernecks. Well, that'll be another fun thing we can have. Just try each other on. There's lots of neat nicknames out there.
But I do have my. That wasn't your trivia question.
Oh, I know that.
Okay. Your trivia question you knew would be much more difficult. Talking about coaches today a little bit. Only one coach in the history of basketball has won an NCAA and an NBA championship. Do you know who that coach is?
Jim, come on. Larry Brown.
Larry Brown, very good. Larry Brown, 1988 with the Kansas Jayhawks. Is that too easy? Do I have to get more difficult with you?
No, I'm sure you'll find difficult ones for me, but that one does sort of jump out. Everybody knows about Coach Brown, who is out of coaching for the first time in many, many years this year, left the Southern Methodist University Mustangs last year. But, yeah, Larry Brown has been around forever, and it is something to say. Now, there are some coaches, and this will be something that we can talk about in weeks to come. There are several coaches who have been on the pro ranks that have moved down. I don't know if any of them have been NBA champions, but some of them have gone to the finals, and who knows? Who could be the next one?
Yeah, most of those coaches that have moved down, I think, didn't find much success or maybe personal satisfaction in coaching in the NBA. So that's kind of why they came back and felt that their niche was more the NCAA style. Although, as we talk about the changes in the NCAA, it seems to be becoming more and more like the NBA.
Mm-hmm. And people probably remember that Coach Brown also took UCLA to the Final Four one year with Kiki Vandeweghe as a star, who's still I believe he's still an administrator with the New York Knicks in some capacity. So that's good. Well, we'll be back next Tuesday, and we can talk about a lot of these games that are there. There'll be another slate of games coming on. Of course, if you want to join us, we'll be talking on our Xavier broadcast, the Razor on Xavier. That'll be this Thursday. You can tune in and do that after we post it. Big start to the Big East for Xavier. And I know Jim will be joining us from the sunny South on Thursday as he takes his family on a holiday vacation that he mentioned earlier. So safe travels there, Jim, and we'll find a time to hook up for our Razorcast.
All right. I'd just like to say Happy New Year to all the listeners, and I think 2017 is going to be an interesting finish for the NCAA college basketball season.
All right. Thanks for listening, and we hope that you'll continue to listen to the two really old guys on sports, especially NCAA men's basketball. Happy New Year to everybody, and we'll talk at you next week.
Hey, you there?
Hold on. I don't know if we're still recording or not. Let's hang up, and I'll call you on your phone.
Okay.